Last week we kicked off a brand new sermon series entitled The Game Plan, and the focus of this sermon series is on how we hope to partner with God in helping people move from a place of unbelief to being fully formed in the image of Jesus Christ. We want to be a community that makes disciples as Jesus Christ commissioned us to. But I realize that may sound far-fetched to some of you. I mean, after all, we live in an area of the country in which people are quick to proclaim their trust in science rather than faith, as if the two are in opposition. And those who do express interest in the spiritual, they oftentimes want to talk about things like a cosmic energy, Mother Nature, astrological signs, or healing crystals. And so this idea of making disciples in the Silicon Valley, in a lot of ways it sounds like the longest of long shots. So why even bother? I have a feeling that's probably the question the Apostle Paul was wrestling with after spending a few days in the city of Corinth. Speaking about Jesus and that notoriously idolatrous, hedonistic city, it had him a bit unnerved, and rightfully and understandably so. There seemed to be a high probability that any talk about Jesus at best would be met with rejection, but in all likelihood it could very easily result in physical harm. Why bother must have been going through his mind, but he didn't have to wrestle with that question for very long, because one night God showed up. And this is what took place as Luke describes in Acts chapter 18 and verse 9 and 10. One night the Lord spoke to Paul in a vision. Do not be afraid, keep on speaking. Do not be silent, for I'm with you. And no one is going to attack and harm you because I have many people in this city. Why bother, Paul? That's the question you're wrestling with. God says, let me tell you why, Paul. Here's why. Because long before you ever rolled into the city of Corinth, I was already in this place working. And even though you don't see it right now, there are people all over this city who are ready to hear the message that I brought you to this place to share. And the same God who is working in the city of Corinth is the same God who's working in the Bay Area. He's working on the hearts of people. He's working on the hearts of co-workers and classmates, and teammates and opponents, and servers and customers, and neighbors and family members. There are people who are ready, but we have to do our part. What's our part? Well, last week we talked about the first step in our discipleship game plan. I want to pause right here for just a moment and just say this. When I mention the word step, that's the word that I use, but I don't want you to think in sequential order. Rather, I want you to think more in the terms of puzzle pieces, okay? So what we're really talking about in this series are the different pieces that go into making a disciple. Make sense to everybody? All right. So what was the very first piece of our discipleship game plan? Does anybody remember from last week? This is always dangerous, but does anybody remember from last week? Okay, good. I think we got it. Create an invitation culture. Create an invitation culture. In the same way that the Samaritan woman invited her fellow townspeople to come check out Jesus after spending some time in conversation with him, we want to be a community of people who are constantly inviting people into spaces in which they might encounter Jesus. Now, last week, I got to have one of those great parking lot conversations that happen just every so often. Here's how the conversation went. Kaya walked up to me in the parking lot, and she said, Sean, I want to introduce you to a friend of mine, and she introduced me to her friend Derek. I don't know if Kaya and Derek are here this morning, but this is what Derek said to me. He said, hey, everything you talked about this morning is exactly what Kaya did. We met in Santa Cruz. She invited me to come to church, and I thought, why not? And so I came, and it has been so much fun this morning. And I share that with you because there are a lot of people out there who are apt to say, why not? Why not? If we'll just work up the courage to actually make the invite. Now, whether they ever come back the second time, it probably depends on how they are received the first time. This is true whether it's in your personal home or in your small group or in an event like Trunk and Treat or at our Sunday morning worship service. So step number 2 in our discipleship game plan is simply this: practice radical hospitality. Can you say that with me? Practice radical hospitality. Now, what do we mean by radical? Well, in one sense, this is what we mean. We want to exceed what is expected. What do most people expect? I imagine what most people expect is they expect a warm greeting. They expect somebody to smile at them. They expect somebody to offer them assistance. Most people expect to be treated in the same way they're treated by that polite, enthusiastic kid that takes their order at Chick-fil-A. That's what they expect. And that's what hospitable churches do. Hospitable churches, they smile. They engage in banter. They show people around. They provide a nice cup of coffee. Now, let me tell you what inhospitable churches do, or churches that aren't very hospitable, let me put it that way. They walk right past people without even noticing them. They don't make an effort to learn people's names. They say, well, I'm not good at that, and so they don't even try. When they're in conversations, they don't really tune in. They're constantly distracted. They're looking off at what they might be missing out on or who they might want to talk to next. Sometimes they make rude and sensitive comments. I'll give you an example of that. Several years ago, I was in a conversation with a first-time guest, and we're having this conversation. All of a sudden, one of our members jumps in, and the member says something like this: "I can't believe it. Is that really you, Joe? What in the world are you doing here?" And then he turns to me and he says, "Sean, this is Joe, and I work with Joe. And Sean, to tell you the truth, we better get out of this building before it collapses because Joe's here." Now, he was trying to be funny, but poor Joe was standing there just mumbling something to me about, hey, it's been a long time since I've actually been in a church. It wasn't good. We want to create a warm, welcoming, you belong here environment. But that's far from enough. In fact, if that's the only thing that we do, is that if that's as far as our hospitality goes, we're going to end up doing more harm than good. I want to share with you a quote from an article that maybe some of you saw online just a couple of weeks ago. It's an observation shared by missiologist Mike Frost. He writes this: "I've lost count of the number of Christians who've told me they either stopped attending church or left their church to join another one because they couldn't make any friends there. They report that the church people were friendly enough. They were hospitable and welcoming. So one person told me, they're nice to you, but no one becomes your friend. And it hurts when all the friendliness leads only to friendlessness." How did 11 men and a handful of women end up becoming devoted disciples of Jesus Christ? Even to the point of a willingness to give up their lives. Was it because Jesus was the friendliest rabbi with the best campfire coffee in all the land? Of course not. It went way beyond that. It was because in his resurrection, Jesus proved, I'm exactly who I claim to be. I'm the Son of God. I'm the Messiah. But even before that, he began to win their hearts by taking an interest in their lives, by going to dinner parties with them, by saying, why don't you go on a road trip with me? By listening to their hurts and their ideas, by comforting them when they were going through difficult times, by being emotionally vulnerable with them, and by sharing with them the deepest secrets of God. He was their friend. And he was a true friend even to one who ended up treating him like an enemy, Judas. Jesus thought in terms of friendship, not rabbi and student with these men and women. We hear his words in John chapter 15 and verse 15. "I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I've called you friends. For everything that I learned from my Father, I've made known to you. We have to get back to doing friendship well. Now, I know for some of you, this thought may be going through your mind. I've done this. I've made friends. My friends moved away. And then I made some other friends, and those friends moved away. And then I made some more friends, and those friends moved away. And I'm tired. I'm tired of investing myself in relationships only to see people disappear and go somewhere else. And it just hurts too much, and I'm not sure I can do this. And I want to say to you this morning, I get it. I understand. Those are significant losses that need to be grieved. They do. But I also want to ask you this question. What choice do we have? Oh, sure, you can choose to spend all of your time on Facebook commenting and liking your friends' posts who live in other states. And you can text back and forth with those individuals and call that a great friendship, but you need more. You may be saying, no, I don't. Yes, you do. You do. You need more. We all need more. The studies, they don't lie. For our emotional and spiritual well-being, we need face-to-face friendships. Face-to-face. But more to the point of what I'm really talking about in this series, about making disciples, to offer someone Jesus without extending to them friendship, it makes a person feel like a project. And nobody wants to feel like a project. But almost everybody wants a friend. Especially the type of friend who will treat them the exact same way that Jesus treated his friends. Now, I just want to own this morning that what I'm asking of us is a lot. It takes a lot of time and intentionality to actually form friendships. And time seems to be the one thing that most of us believe we're in short supply of as it is. But I want to suggest to you this morning that if we think creatively, we'll begin to notice that there are natural rhythms in our lives in which we can include people and we can begin to form relationships or spend time with people. For instance, let me ask you this question. How many of you eat every day? Well, most of you, right? Okay, most of us eat every day, so how about setting this goal? How about setting a goal that you're going to eat with somebody else at least once a week? Maybe it's a person at Campbell here in this church that you don't know very well. Maybe it's a newcomer to this church. Maybe it's a coworker. Maybe it's a parent of a kid who plays on the same sports team as your son or daughter. But you find somebody that you don't know very well. You want to begin to build a relationship with that person, and you invite them to lunch. And really, there's only one agenda that I hope I'm going to say two. Two agendas, not agendas, but kind of two principles as you go to lunch with these individuals. Here's the first one. Just take an interest in them. Like, be curious about them. Keep in mind, it's not about you sharing your whole life story. It's discovering who they are, really wanting to know them, making sure they feel known and seen and cared about. And then number two, the second thing we're going to pay attention to is we want to tune into the Holy Spirit and how he's working in the midst of that conversation. Tune into what the Holy Spirit is revealing about what this person needs, or how you can pray for this person that you're at lunch with. Or if it just so happens that the Holy Spirit opens up the door, you may even have the opportunity to mention something about Jesus or church or your walk with Christ as well. But you're paying attention. Now, I also want to encourage this. I want to encourage you the first time you go to the lunch with this person. Okay, get this, write this down. I want to encourage you to pay. Yeah, I want to encourage you to pay. And it's not because we're going to kind of, you owe me one. It's not so we can eventually say, hey, Joe, remember that time I bought your lunch? Well, I need you to go to church with me on Easter so I can just, kind of get on the preacher's good side. It's not like that at all. You say, then why? Why is it so important that we buy their lunch? Here's why it's important. Because generosity is one of the best ways to image the God who became poor so that we might be rich. Now, again, some of you may be thinking, okay, but I don't have much margin in my finances. Understand that as well. Keep this in mind, though. At the heart of being a follower of Jesus Christ is sacrifice. And so I want to ask you this morning to begin thinking about what you might be able to cut out of your budget, or think about how you can add some extra income, just kind of a side hustle or something, so that you can be radically generous with those who don't know Jesus. I also want you to begin to think about how you can shape your schedule, maybe cut some things out, so that you can host more people in your home. Why is this important? Having people into your home is one of the ways that we show we value you. We really do. You say, but having people in my home stresses me out. I mean, to have people in my home, I have to have everything in just the right place. I got to fix the perfect meal. The kids have to behave for 2 hours. I can't get them to behave for 20 minutes. It stresses me out. Relax. Everybody relax for just a moment. Perfection is not the key for making somebody feel welcome and seen. Engagement is. Engagement is. This is something that Mary understood that Martha missed when they hosted their friend Jesus in their home. Martha was so busy doing to get things right for Jesus that she ended up kind of snapping at her guest. Listen to what she said. Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her to help me. Like, she just loses it at that point, right? And then Jesus responds, and he comes back and he says this, Martha, Martha, the Lord answered, you're worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. Being is more important than doing. For many of us, the stress of doing is keeping us from being with people that need to know Jesus. It's better to have your neighbor over for a grilled cheese and chips in a clutter-filled living room than to wait until you can fix a 5-course meal and have the perfect table decoration. Because you and I both know that day's not coming. So we might as well just get after it, right? Now, friendship takes time, but it can also be messy. It really can. The first time you go to lunch with that coworker, it's great. I mean, the two of you, you talk about work, and you talk about kids, and you talk about vacation plans, and it's great. But then the third time you go to lunch with that coworker, he starts to open up. And he talks about how his marriage is on the rocks, and he talks about how he's been drinking too much scotch on the rocks, and he talks about how if things don't get better at work, he's going to be shoveling rocks for a living. And you leave the first lunch feeling all energized, but by the time you leave the third lunch, you feel strung out to dry, right? Friendship is messy, but that's where Jesus does some of his best work. So I want to ask you this morning, who do you know? Who do you know at work? Who do you know in your neighborhood? Who do you know at school? Who do you know in this church whose life is a bit of a mess right now? And what would it look like for you to actually begin to befriend that person? You said, but Sean, those people are so unpleasant to be around. Yeah, people who are in pain and chaos, sometimes they're hard to be around. But here's the good news. You know the person who can relieve some of that pain for them. And you may not have the opportunity to share Jesus with them the first time you get into those conversations and they reveal their mess and they talk about their pain, they talk about the chaos. But if you will continue to be their friend in the ups and downs and just stick with them, even when it hurts, even when it's hard, you'll eventually have the opportunity to share Jesus. How can we claim to be a follower of Jesus Christ if we're not willing to befriend the messy? The messy were Jesus's people. Matthew chapter 9, verse 9 through 11, as Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth. Follow me, he told him. Matthew got up and followed him. While Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. And when the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? When we talk about radical hospitality, we're not simply talking about going from just being a friendly group of people to actually engaging in friendship. What we're really talking about when we talk about radical is we want to move from being a people who engage in relationships to also making sure that we offer that type of relationship to every single person, to those on the margins, the ostracized and the marginalized, and those who are often not considered worthy of friendship. We want to be a community of people just like Jesus. We want to be a community of people where white people and people of color, PhDs and GEDs, married and singles, rich and poor, saint and sinner, are equally invited and valued in friendship. So who's on the fringes? Who's on the fringes at work? Who's on the fringes in your neighborhood? Who's in the fringes at your school? Who's on the fringes in this church that you can begin to befriend? It's hard to do because it's often frowned upon by those who don't have the heart of Jesus. If you do this type of work, there's a good chance you're going to hear comments like this. Why'd you invite Sam? He's weird. Why'd you ask Janet? Her background's so different than mine. I'm always afraid I'm going to say the wrong thing. Why'd you invite Raul? Don't you know about his past? You're going to hear comments like that because it's hard for people to befriend those who are different than them. So let me put the cards on the table. By befriending those on the margins, Jesus' reputation took a beating. It took a beating. Luke 7, verse 34, the Son of Man came eating and drinking, and you say, here's a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. Jesus begins to befriend these people that nobody else thinks are worthy of friendship, and all of a sudden they start accusing him of things he wasn't guilty of because they didn't know how to handle that. How do you be friends with people on the margins? Because we don't want to be, so we're going to accuse Jesus of doing these things. And if you start to do this type of work, there's a good chance your reputation to take a beating as well. And teens, I'll just speak straight to you. You're probably most at risk. I mean, to be honest, I remember that stage a lot. You start sitting with people at school that are on the fringes. You start being a friend of those people and asking them to come be a part of what you're doing. Your reputation, good chance, it's going to take a beating. But here's the deal. What's true of Jesus and what must be true of us is this, is that he didn't care nearly as much about his reputation as he did building relationships with people that needed to know him. It's costly to take this stance. A number of years ago, I invited a family to be a part of our small group. I think truthfully, looking back upon the situation, I think they reached out to me and said, can we be a part of your small group? I said yes. We had our first small group meeting that night, and after everybody had left, later that evening, I got a phone call. It was from another lady who was in our group, and she said this. She said, Sean, if that particular family continues to come to this small group, then our family is going to have to look for a different small group to be a part of. And she went on to explain that she didn't want her kids to be exposed to the kids of this particular other family. Now, our kids at that particular time, they ranged in the age of probably 2nd to 5th grade. And in some ways, I understood her concern. Story within a story. One Sunday morning, I'm walking out of church. I look in the parking lot. My oldest son and the oldest son of this family in question, they're just throwing haymakers at each other in the church parking lot. And my oldest son gets a bloody nose and a bruised ego. Now, I'm asking you, please don't ever repeat this story to Turner when he comes to visit, okay? Because he's still a little bit embarrassed. That's what happened on that morning. And so I kind of understood that these kids could be unruly. Her kids and my kids could be unruly. But what choice did I have? How could I tell a family who was seeking to grow in their relationship with Jesus and also grow in community with other Christians, you're no longer invited to our group because your kids aren't under control enough for some people in the group? I couldn't. And so I said to that concerned mother simply this. I said, we're going to do everything we possibly can. I understand your concern. I'm hearing your concern. We're going to do what we can to keep an eye on all the kids to make sure everybody gets along and they behave. But this particular lady and her family, they decided to change groups anyway. And it hurts. Because they were a family that I really believed that I could be good friends with. And I wasn't going to have the opportunity. But I was also reminded in that moment, sometimes you have to lose to gain for the kingdom of God. And so just as we did last week, we want to share with you some of the ways that we're trying to live this out as a community here at Campbell. This morning, Lauren's going to share with us some of the ways that we're currently trying to practice radical hospitality right here in this place.
So when I think of hospitality, I can't help but think of my mother. She might, and sometimes her hosting may be a little bit more Martha than Mary. But I'm talking the same amount of butter as green beans. The mashed potatoes are awesome. Her dining room table is always seasonally set. And the barbecue chicken is real yum. When I think about radical hospitality, truly, I think about this family. From the second I pulled in and parked my car for the first time at Campbell, Cam Parker and Joshua Ritter were mowing my lawn. Emma Ritter was picking weeds. I think of this morning how, I don't even know what time the Dorseys got here, to provide not only snacks and food, but also coffee to have that extra cozy feeling. I can't help but to think of also the other things that have happened this morning. How your name has probably been spoken to you. How if you're a visitor, I'm confident that someone in this room has talked to you and people want to follow up with you later and genuinely get to know you and know your heart. I think about how there's an intentionality with names. I even see the students do this. I see our kids do this. I think about how we have an AA group that meets on Sunday mornings before we even come into this space, right here on our campus. Speaking of our campus, radical hospitality, right? I think about how just on this stage a few weekends ago, Christopher and Roseanne Foz were in a play along with a ton of other CCS students. And in this space where we worship, hundreds of people came into this space to see their children perform in a play. I think of that living room space right there in the courtyard. How last week, I was just a part of even 3 different groups with students or with a meeting around a fire pit, having hospitable conversations. Real life, how are you? Where is your heart? I think about the food. Truly, I think about the food. I think about how before I moved to Campbell, California, I had no idea that Filipino food is my favorite. And it's amazing. And we have incredible people here that can make incredible Filipino food. I think of how I've had incredible Indian cuisine by Sandeep in his home. How amazing. I think of sharing a hamburger, watching your son play football. I think about sitting around Betty Hall, I call her California Grams, Betty Hall's table and laughing and talking with Dale about her 7 different births that she has given. I think about time with you shared eating around a table. I think about when I couldn't go to my grandfather's funeral because of COVID, there was DoorDash on my front porch that night. I think about how there's been a couple here who has a baby in the NICU living with some of our members, just who are some of their friends, and there was a meal train brought up for them within a week. I think about how you have invited people around your tables, even in a really rough year when there's hard things to navigate. I think about how our diversity and inclusion team is doing that hard work. That really hard work that is the work of the Lord to show their intentionality to bring our church to a better and even more hospitable place that is gospel-centered and kingdom-looking forward. I think about how our elders hospitably ask you for prayer requests and genuinely pray over each of them by name, by name on Sundays. And then do it again on Tuesdays. And they don't just say like praying over the prayer requests. They pray for each one every time they pray. And that's as a group. That's not even counting the times that they pray individually for you throughout the week. Campbell practices hospitality really well. I would say radically. And though I think we're really good at it, that doesn't keep us from moving forward, right? Yesterday I had a conversation with some of the girls about something that I think that they're good at, but calling them up, calling them higher to a higher standard in that. And I want to do the same for us today. I want you to invite someone into your home, as Sean was talking about. But what if it's someone that doesn't look like you? What if it's someone that's not in your exact season of life? What if it's someone that doesn't have your marital status? And it doesn't have to be perfect. You do not have to have my mom's incredible mashed potatoes. You don't even have to have food at all. Yesterday at a conference that the girls and I were at, one of the speakers said, people don't need to see Christ's perfection in you, but the power of Christ working through your weakness. Your food doesn't need to be radical. Your love already is. But may we continue to show the love of the Lord through our radical hospitality, not just to the people within this church and in these walls, but to anyone that we can come in contact with outside of this space.
Amen. Thank you, Lauren. So this part's just a little bit off script. While we do it really well, I also want to acknowledge that for some of you, you've shared with me in private conversations that it hasn't always been your experience, that there have been some insensitive comments made from time to time, that there have been occasions where you've been in a conversation with a group of people and they all went a direction to go hang out and you were kind of left standing there. I want to say I'm sorry. I'm sorry for each and every person who's felt like you've been left still on the fringes. And I hope what you hear this morning is we want to do better. Lauren's right. So many good things going on, but we want to do better. We want every single person to feel like this is a place where they can build and develop true friendships. And that starts with each of us individually. It starts with me, reflecting upon my own inadequacies, repenting of that, and trying to grow. And I hope this morning you'll take the time to think about yourself as well. As we wrap this up, I want to just leave with you a couple of action steps. And so, before we talk about action step number 1, let me ask you about action step from last week. How many of you took the time to write out the names of people that you want to invite at least by Easter and started to pray over those people? Show of hands. Okay, that's a good 3 or 4 or 5 people. All right, congratulations to all of you. We thank you very, very much. To the rest of you, I want to encourage you to do it. For some of you, you might be thinking, but I don't have anybody to list on that card. I just don't know anybody outside of who attends here right now. And we'll talk about that down the road here in a week or two. But maybe you just write on your card and start to pray about this. God, would you please open up an opportunity for me to meet somebody that I can actually invite? And you start to pray about that. But I hope you'll take this seriously, because prayer makes a difference. As we talked about throughout our last sermon series, we have a God who listens to our cries and our pleas, and he interacts, and he moves. He moves people from where they are to a better place that they need to be. And so start praying. But I also want to ask now, action step number 1 is that you identify one of the people on that list and you spend some time with them this week. That you go to lunch, you grab a cup of coffee, you go on a hike, you invite them into your home for a dessert, and you just do friendship. So that's action step number 1 for this week. Action step number 2 is simply this. Think about how you can sharpen your skills as a friend. I'll go back to the article written by Mike Frost, and he says this. He says, honestly, churchgoers don't make great friends. And he identifies 3 reasons. Reason number 1, he says, is because we don't listen well. Reason number 2 is because we struggle to be vulnerable with other people. And then reason number 3 was we're too busy. This deserves a much deeper dive. Maybe at some point we'll come back to it and talk about how do we really be friends. But for this week, I just want to encourage you to maybe think about one of those areas and begin to address it. You may think you're a great listener, but ask somebody. Ask somebody, and if there's a way, start paying attention, read some articles, do some study. What's it really look like to be a good listener? You may struggle with vulnerability, but vulnerability is absolutely key to connecting with other people. Stretch yourself. Share a little bit more than you're used to sharing. Be vulnerable with someone. And we've kind of touched on busy. This is a great community of people. I am so thankful to be a part of you. You, as Lauren has said, love really, really well. We want this entire community to experience it. Take the love that you show each other in this place and make sure we display it in our neighborhoods and with our coworkers and with our classmates and every place we go.